body and grinding down the center.
News! Okay, we'll start with this. Unbeaten up-and-comer of Australia, Skye Nicholson posted this via her Twitter account. She's apparently ranked at number 6 in the current IBF ranked standings in today's featherweight division. She's gained a lot of ground very fast in just a little under a year's time as Skye Nicholson debuted as a professional this year, sporting a professional record of 4 wins, no losses,
no draws, and no recorded knockouts. Not yet.
Set to return to action next month in her native Australia against Christina Jacobs. Before this year is out, it looks like she's going to advance to a professional record of 5 wins and no losses.
But I will say this. Skye Nicholson should not be pressured into anything at this time, in spite of where she's ranked by the IBF.
You know, they likely put her on the IBF route in hopes that she would lock horns with Sarah Mahfoud. And I think what they didn't anticipate is that Sarah Mahfoud in the very near future would be sharing the ring with Amanda Serrano. I don't think they saw that coming.
I don't think they knew that was going to happen.
Amanda Serrano is set to take on IBF featherweight champion Sarah Mahfoud on the undercard of Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker at the end of this month. And in all likelihood, Amanda Serrano is going to beat her. She will take her blue belt.
If Skye stays on this path, climbing up these ranks, it's not Sarah Mahfoud she'll be confronted with. It's Amanda Serrano, and she's not ready for an Amanda Serrano. No way, shape, or form. Not at 5-0.
And not in just her first year as a professional boxer, because that's what this is. This is her first year as a pugilist, as a prize fighter in the pro ranks. She debuted this year.
Now, I'm not suggesting that they should wrap Skye Nicholson in a cocoon, wrap her in 10 feet of bubble wrap. I'm not saying that.
I'm saying she's ranked at number 6 right now by way of the IBF's ranked standings. And if she keeps climbing up those ranks, she'll eventually be in position to challenge Amanda Serrano, given that she's already at number 6 and she debuted as a professional this year.
Being ranked at number 6 by way of the IBF does not mean you're ready for Amanda Serrano by any stretch of the imagination.
Not by a long shot. Not in your first year as a professional boxer, and not even in your second.
There's no fucking way.
Now here's what I suggest. Here's what makes sense to me. Skye Nicholson might not be ready for an Amanda Serrano, but I do think she's skilled enough and prepared enough, ready enough for a Cheyenne Hansen or a Jennifer Miranda, Anina Menke, and Elena Thiessen. These fights make a lot more sense for a Skye Nicholson, a fighter who is still developing as a fighter in what still is her first year as a professional boxer. Those are fights that make sense.
Don't forget that Skye Nicholson hasn't fought in a 10-rounder yet. The Christina Jacobs fight is going to be the first.
That will be the first 10-round fight of her professional career as a boxer. You don't want to rush this kid into anything. She's young. She's got plenty of time. You rush her into a situation where she suffers a loss.
You go jumping the gun unnecessarily, putting her in tougher fights than she needs to be in.
She'll end up suffering a setback needlessly. There's no need for it. There are ample fights, ample fighters in this division for Skye Nicholson to continue to develop as a fighter over time. There's really no need to rush her into anything or to target any alphabet titles, any full-fledged alphabet titles at this time.
She don't need alphabet titles right now. What she needs is rounds. Rounds in the bank.
She could get those rounds with Anina Menke, with Elena Thiessen, with a Cheyenne Hansen.
Skye Nicholson, to the eye, still seems to have an amateurish style. She hasn't yet fully made that transition to a pro style.
Just stating the obvious. She might be number 6 in the IBF's ranked standings, but that don't mean she's ready to become an IBF champion or challenge for an IBF title. Far from it. The next 12 months for Skye should be spent continuing to develop as a fighter. That's all I'm saying. Other news, ahead of his third fight with Gennady Golovkin, Canelo Alvarez said, "I still feel I'm the best pound for pound. Nobody takes risks like me."
Immediately after that loss to Dmitry Bivol, a lot of people wanted to write Canelo Alvarez off.
They wanted to tell themselves, each other, and others that he was never any good to begin with, that
It was all over.
just a few months later, here he is in yet another mega fight, another mega event. He was quoted as saying, "I think I'm the best fighter in the world because nobody does what I do in boxing. Nobody takes risks like me, and I don't need to take risks, please. But I love challenges, and that's it. And I feel I'm still the best." Canelo Alvarez has a very credible argument that a lot of fight fans, due to their own biases and preferences, don't want to acknowledge. That he has, in fact, beaten more active champions and taken belts
from them. He's literally done that more times than all of his contemporaries.
at more weights than most, if not all of, his contemporaries.
Let me tell you something. I don't give a fuck who your favorite fighter is.
I don't care who you went to school with. I don't care who you live down the block from. I don't care whose spit bucket you carry in a gym. I don't care. Pound for pound lists aren't about you.
Pound for pound list at its base is a skills assessment, and there really are only a few ways to evaluate skills in the sport of boxing.
Eye tests, anecdotes, and annotations from armchair critics need not apply because nothing says more about who you are in boxing than who you're fighting. How many champions are you taking on and how often? And nobody's doing that more than Canelo Alvarez. Not right now.
He's about to fight Gennady Golovkin for the third time, and I ain't got no illusions about this fight. In all likelihood, he is going to beat Gennady Golovkin.
I got no illusions. The Gennady Golovkin that stands before us here today is not the same wrecking machine that he used to be. The disconnect, however,
Especially amongst Canelo Alvarez's biggest critics.
the disconnect is that there's no demand for this fight. No interest. No buzz. All week, that's what I've been hearing. Up until the weigh-in. Up until all those people showed up. You think those people showed up to this weigh-in by accident? You think all those people attended this thing because they're not interested in this fight? Because this fight ain't got no buzz? Let me tell you something.
Even a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin is still more relevant than a Jermall Charlo. More relevant than a David Benavidez.
By far and wide, it goes without saying. Just look at the audience. Look at the turnout for this thing.
There are a lot of people, they want this event to fail. They told themselves and each other it had no buzz. Nobody wanted to see it. Fast forward.
Massive turnout. Massive. Just for a fucking weigh-in. They're resentful that Canelo Alvarez decided to go his own way and do his own thing the way he always does. He decided not to take up Al Heyman on his offer, his two-fight deal worth $100 million.
Why don't you use that $100 million to finance some fights between your own fucking fighters?
I'll tell you why. It's because you can't actually offer Canelo Alvarez $100 million. When you're dealing with Canelo Alvarez, it's actually Canelo that's bringing all the value to the table.
When you say you're quote-unquote offering Canelo Alvarez $100 million, you're not actually offering him that. You just know that he's good for it, so you're willing to stake it.
Because you know that he's good for it. Because you know he can generate it. He generated 800,000 pay-per-view buys on the Showtime platform with a little-known super middleweight named Caleb Plant.
And let's not pretend that those were Caleb Plant fans that showed up and Caleb Plant fans that bought the pay-per-view. We all know who the driving force for the fight was. Let's not waste each other's time.
What a lot of people have been doing in reference to this trilogy, in reference to Gennady Golovkin and his role in all of this, that he is simply too old to get people interested in a trilogy, too old to sell this fight. But if it were Gennady Golovkin versus Jermall Charlo, or Gennady Golovkin versus David Benavidez, do you think that's what these critics would be saying? Would he be too old then? See, the way I see it, even a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin is still better than the best fighters. Those fighters have been fighting.
For Christ's sakes, David Benavidez just fought a guy Golovkin beat up years ago, and David Lemieux in his last fight.
Earlier this year, what these guys like to do more than anything is move goalposts. And I know their arms have got to be so tired from having to do that. If it were Jermall Charlo fighting today's Gennady Golovkin, they wouldn't be saying he's too old. They'd be saying he's the best scalp.
Don't you see what they did with Sergey Derevianchenko after Danny Jacobs and Gennady Golovkin beat him?
Jermall Charlo ends up with their sloppy seconds. Sloppy thirds, really.
These hens get to cackling and start saying things like Jermall Charlo beat Sergey better than Gennady did.
Not factoring into the equation that by the time that both Danny Jacobs and Gennady Golovkin were done with Sergey, there wasn't much left in Sergey.
You don't think they'd do that with Gennady if any one of them were lucky enough to share the ring with him? Believe me, they would.
Those obscure fighters and their small cult of followers stay up at night praying to the boxing gods that someone with the status and the stature of a Gennady Golovkin gave a flying furry fuck about a Jermall Charlo or a David Benavidez. And that's why they resent Canelo Alvarez so much, because he's the big fish.
And Gennady's a big fish too, and guess what? What? They don't give a fuck about your favorite fighter.
They think they can fool people. And I guess that fighting soft competition in order to preserve your unbeaten record, I guess that doesn't go a long way with the fans the way these guys think it does. You're fighting in these fights nobody cares about, nobody's excited about. What do you expect?
That's why they resent Canelo Alvarez, and that's why they resent this entire event. This entire trilogy. A trilogy that, for my money,
Was far more competitive than Wilder versus Fury was.
those same critics, they didn't seem to mind that fucking shit show. The last two fights were basically just Wilder getting his ass kicked.
All the critiques and criticisms you've seen associated with this show, with this trilogy, have everything to do with a small section of fight fans, a small cult really, who are resentful that Eddie Hearn is doing a show this size in Al Heyman's neck of the woods. Resentful that Canelo Alvarez rejected the PBC.
Eddie Hearn is putting on, at minimum, a $65 million fight in Al Heyman's neck of the woods.
Whilst Al Heyman and his PBC struggle to get Crawford versus Spence over the line. There were a lot of people earlier this year that wanted guys like me and you to believe that that fight was on the scale of this fight. But if that fight were really on the scale...
If that fight were on par with this one, they would have got it done by now, because the investors and whoever's supposed to bankroll it...
They wouldn't be so apprehensive about it. They could put up whatever they've got to put up to get the fight done because they'd be confident they'd get their money back. That's if that fight were on the same scale as this one, but it's not. And listen, I hope they get the fight done. I hope they get it over the line. But you're kidding yourself if you think Spence versus Crawford generates as much revenue as this fight.
It doesn't. I'm sorry.
As far as this fight, my closing thoughts, what I'm expecting to see, well, Canelo Alvarez is coming off a loss to Dimitri Bivol. A guy who's bigger than he is, fast hands, fast feet, he's durable. Canelo couldn't put a dent in that guy. A very frustrating night for the cash cow of boxing in this part of the world, and what he had to deal with in that fight. Whereas in this fight, I feel like this fight for Canelo
It's gonna be a breath of fresh air.
almost the exact opposite of what he just had to deal with in Dimitri Bivol.
Well, that guy's fast and he's in his prime. This guy isn't.
That guy, it's real hard to put a dent in that guy, and he's real hard to hit with a clean shot, whereas this guy isn't.
Canelo Alvarez ain't in unfamiliar territory with Gennady Golovkin. He fought the man for 24 rounds, and before that, he actually sparred him.
The slow decay of time, I suspect, has affected Gennady Golovkin, who just doesn't seem quite the wrecking machine that he used to. Oh, he's still world class, and he's still formidable. For God's sake, he's only ever lost to Canelo Alvarez, and he still reigns as a unified middleweight champion here today. But this fight is at super middleweight, a weight where Gennady has not campaigned.
Listen, Gennady Golovkin was never a speedster.
He was a lot of things, but he was never a guy you would have described as having all that much hand speed. And over time, coupled with the added weight he's going to be carrying into the ring with him, weight he's not accustomed to carrying into a fight, let alone a fight at this level against this level of opponent, I think Canelo Alvarez is going to be able to beat him to the punch.
Between the slow decay of time and the added weight.
Hand-eye coordination, speed, and reflexes, these are not things that improve over time, you know.
He's going to be heavier than he usually is, carrying more weight into this fight than what he usually carries into a fight. Yeah, I think Canelo's going to beat him to the punch.
Word is out Nobody really likes it to the body, but for Gennady Golovkin in particular, that seems to be an Achilles heel. We saw that Sergey hurt him to the body more recently, earlier this year. We saw Ryota Murata hurt him to the body, land a couple of hard body shots.
On a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin, and let me tell you something, you don't heal at 40 how you did at 20.
Yes, he's still formidable, and yes, he's still world class. For God's sakes, he's still a unified champion here today at 40 years old. But what I don't think is that he takes a punch and recovers from one as easily as he used to, the way he did in the first two Canelo Alvarez fights. I think we're looking at a guy who got tenderized in his last fight.
He's about to share the ring with a guy who really doesn't like him, really wants to hurt him.
Means to retire him. A guy who knows him, and he's fighting this guy at this guy's best weight.
I'm telling you the whole thing. I feel like this fight is going to be a breath of fresh air for Canelo Alvarez.
I think that Canelo Alvarez is going to march forward in that high guard, looking to catch and shoot, land hard shots, hard hooks on Gennady Golovkin's midsection. Hard hooks to the body. I think he's going to look to regularly go there to break this guy down and break him down early. Then he'll start unloading the head shots, the head punches.
I have no doubts that Canelo Alvarez will have success going to the body because Ryota Murata had success going to the body, and Canelo's faster than him.
Yeah.
Better than him.
Yeah. While I don't see a clean knockout, a cold knockout, I see a situation to where once Canelo Alvarez gets this guy hurt, and he is going to hurt him, he's going to start to unload. He's going to start to unload on Gennady to where either the referee is going to stop this thing, or Jonathan Banks is going to throw the towel, as Gennady will sustain more punishment than you're accustomed to seeing Gennady Golovkin sustain. It's going to be a sight to see, and I think it's going to be a good fight, a aesthetically pleasing fight, an action fight for however long it lasts, though I don't think it's going to go the distance.
Yeah, I think Canelo's going to stop him. By way of knockout or technical knockout, I've got Canelo.
And I think most people have got Canelo Alvarez winning this thing. But if Canelo winning seems like a foregone conclusion to a lot of people, then how is this box office?
Because you know what you're paying for by now. You know it's going to be an action fight, and there's a good chance that somebody's going to get stopped. These two guys are marquee fighters, don't forget that.
These two guys can put asses in the seats irrespective of each other. When you bring them together, you get a mega match. You get a super fight. It was Joe Markowski that said, listen, there are fights and there are mega fights.
Joe Markowski, DAZN's executive vice president.
The magnitude of this fight, I think everyone in this arena today understands. For DAZN, it's the fight we've been trying to make for 4 years. Our story in the United States is wrapped up in this fight.
And I think they're going to do good at the box office. I think they're going to do good at the gate. More importantly, because this is a global streaming platform,
available in approximately 190 countries, 190 territories. To my knowledge, the fight itself is only a pay-per-view in America and the United Kingdom, but they may see an influx of new subscribers in regions like Canada and certain parts of Europe,
where even if it's not a pay-per-view, you still need to be a DAZN subscriber to see it.
You might see an influx of people subscribed for at least 1 month so that they can watch.